In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's the first verse of the Bible in Genesis. This is the opposite of the theory of evolution we've been brought up with. Did life evolve naturally, or was it designed by a higher intelligence? These are the two views of the universe and the origin of life. The debate between them continues to this day.
Hello everyone, welcome to Audible Wisdom. Protect your eyes with your ears. I hope you enjoy listening to books.
Today we're going to talk about the debate between evolution and creation. How we got here. Creationism and evolution have very different views on the origin of life. Creationism believes that all living things, from the most primitive to the most complex, were created by other intelligent beings, like God or extraterrestrials. Evolution, on the other hand, believes that life has evolved over a long period of time. From inorganic matter to organic matter, from organic matter to the simplest single-celled organisms. Single-celled organisms evolved into colorful multicellular organisms. So how did these two theories of the origin of life come about? What are their bases, and which one is more plausible? Let's start with the theory of evolution. 1. The theory of evolution. In ancient times, the concept of man and animal was common to both East and West. In the Old Testament, God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the beasts of the earth, and over every insect that creepeth upon the earth." The Hebrews and later Christians believed that man was somewhere between God and the animals. Creationism makes a clear claim about the relationship between humans and animals. God determined at creation that man was different from and superior to animals. But Darwin's On the Origin of Species, published in 1859, dealt the death blow to the idea of man and animal as opposites. On December 27, 1831, Darwin, a British naturalist, left Plymouth Harbor aboard the HMS Beagle to embark on a 5-year voyage around the world. The voyage began as nothing special, but when it ended, it shook the world. Its direct result was the birth of the theory of evolution. Its indirect result was the ferment and explosion of social Darwinism. Let's look at how Darwin discovered evolution. It was an accidental discovery. Darwin was on an expedition in South America and was puzzled by the discovery of fossilized marine organisms on the peaks of the Andes. When the Beagle set sail, Darwin took a book with him, Principles of Geology by the British geologist Lyell. Lyell believed that the Earth's topography and landscapes were the result of constant, subtle changes over time. Lyell believed that small forces such as wind, rain, ice, and snow could completely alter the Earth's surface over millions of years. Darwin himself believed that, given enough time, small, imperceptible changes could make a huge difference. Darwin estimated that the mid-Cretaceous period was about 300 million years ago. Natural factors, such as long periods of small earthquakes, allowed the remains of creatures that had been in the sea to be found high up in the mountains. In the 5th year of his voyage, 1836, Darwin visited the islands of Cologne and Galapagos off the coast of South America. These are known as the most beautiful archipelagos in the world and are home to some unusual species, such as land lizards, giant tortoises, and many species of finches. During his expedition to the Galapagos Islands, Darwin found that the tortoises and finches on each island were not very different, but they were different in some ways. He also noticed that life on the Galapagos was very similar to life on the South American continent. So he began to suspect that the creatures of the islands might have shared a common ancestor. The differences between them were the result of thousands of years of adaptation to the different environments of each island. Each species was the result of small variations accumulated over countless generations. Biological evolution was not a new concept at the time. In 1809, the French zoologist Lamarck proposed, "As the environment changes, species adapt their organs to the environment. Organs that are commonly used will grow larger, and those that are not will gradually degenerate. And the changes acquired in one generation would be passed on to the next." But at the time, there was no scientific evidence to support the hypothesis that acquired physical characteristics were heritable. Later, the theory of population by the British demographer Malthus inspired Darwin. Malthus proposed that food production would never keep up with population growth. Insufficient food supply would lead to famine or war, which would eventually lead to population decline. Darwin used this as an extension of the mechanism by which biological evolution occurs. Evolution is the result of free elimination in the competition for survival. Resources like food and space are limited. Only the best adapted individuals survive and perpetuate the community. The concept of natural selection gradually emerged during Darwin's 5-year expedition around the world. Upon his return to England in 1836, Darwin slowly wrote up his ideas, but they were never published. Most scholars believe that one of the reasons Darwin delayed publishing his work was because he feared a backlash from the church. In 1858, Darwin received a letter from Wallace, who was studying the formation of species in the Malay archipelago. Wallace's views on the origin of species had much in common with his own. This past is also mentioned in The Origin of Species. On the one hand, Darwin feared being suspected of stealing ideas from his juniors. On the other hand, Wallace's support boosted his confidence. So the two men published their views on the origin of species under their joint signatures at the Linnean Society of London in 1858. Alvin's Origin of Species followed in 1859. Evolutionary theory was born. The Galapagos Islands became known as the Island of Evolution. At the heart of Darwin's Origin of Species is the idea of survival of the fittest. When the same species reproduces, it mutates. Those that are adapted to their environment will survive, and those that are not will be eliminated. Over time, through natural selection, small variations accumulate and become significant, which can lead to the formation of new species. As a result, species have evolved through natural selection to become better adapted to their environment. Since ancient times, people have believed that so many of nature's species began as they are, created by God or some other supernatural force, all at once. But Darwin's theory of evolution suggests that all living things have a common ancestor. Nature didn't start that way, but evolved from simple to complex, from simple to diverse. The book on the origin of species introduced the idea of variation and natural selection. This heralded a new interpretation of the origin of mankind. Then, in 1871, Darwin published The Descent of Man. Darwin published The Descent of Man in 1871. The animal ancestors of mankind were early aquatic, living in the sea like the larvae of certain sea squirts. They evolved through the fish stage, the amphibian stage, the reptile stage, and then the mammal stage. Among the higher mammals, lemurs evolved into apes. The most recent ancestor of humans was an ancient ape. So man is just one species of animal that has evolved. In this way, Darwin's theory of evolution completely rejects the dichotomy between humans and animals. In Darwin's evolutionary tree from fish to man, man is just a small branch. The time dimension of evolution. Before Darwin's theory of evolution, since the beginning of time, people have defined things by their attributes and characteristics. Take taxonomy. There are many different kinds of organisms in nature. People have categorized them according to their similarities and differences in form, habits, and functions. We can collectively call this method of classification characteristic classification. Characteristic classification is only a static classification of organisms with clear boundaries between species. Darwin's theory of evolution introduced the time dimension into biological taxonomy for the first time by classifying different species in the order in which they appeared. This broke down the clear boundaries between species and overturned the theory of species invariance. All life on Earth is interconnected. Whether it's a bird and a banana or a fish and a flower, they all belong to the same family in ancient times. Since the birth of evolution, there has been an alternative explanation for the origin of life to creationism. But the struggle between it and creationism has never stopped. In fact, Darwin's theory of evolution was not perfect at the time of its creation. At the time, some biologists were reluctant to accept it. Some creationists have suggested that there were 3 major doubts about evolution at that time. Asterisk 3 major doubts about Darwin's theory of evolution. 1. The absence of transitional fossils. According to the theory of evolution, Organisms evolve by a process of gradual change through environmental selection. Therefore, there should be transitional forms between old and new species. The only evidence for this is found in fossils. But at the time Darwin published his paper, there was not a single fossil specimen that could be considered transitional. Darwin attributed this to the incomplete fossil record and believed that further searches would reveal some transitional fossils. Indeed, 2 years after the publication of On the Origin of Species, the transitional reptile bird fossil, the patriarch, was unearthed. Since then, a wide variety of transitional fossils have been discovered. The most famous is the ape-to-human fossil, the Homo sapiens fossil. Today, there are thousands of fossils known as transitional fossils. Compared to the millions of known fossils, they're still very rare. There are 2 reasons for this. One is that biological fossils form by chance, so the fossil record is necessarily incomplete. On the other hand, according to the currently popular punctuated equilibrium hypothesis, when organisms evolve, they tend to stabilize for a long time and then rapidly evolve into new species in a short period of time, making it more difficult for transitional forms to be fossilized. 2. The age of the Earth. Since the theory of evolution suggests that biological evolution is a gradual process of change, it would take an incredibly long time. Darwin thought it would take at least 1 billion years. William Thomson, also known as Lord Kelvin, the leading physicist of his day, was a creationist. He used thermodynamics to prove that the Earth was only 100 million years old. Darwin couldn't defend himself against the challenge of an authoritative physicist. All he could say was, "I am sure that one day it will be discovered that the world is even older than Thomson calculated." We now know that Darwin was right and Thomson was wrong. Today's geological community, uranium and lead dating, has calculated that the Earth is over 4 billion years old. And life originated at least 3 billion years ago. And at that time, it was clear that people preferred to trust the authorities of physics when it came to the age of the Earth. 3. Lack of a genetic mechanism. Darwin could not find a rational genetic mechanism to explain evolution. There was a widespread belief in biology at the time in what was known as fusion inheritance. It seemed obvious that the characteristics of the father and mother would be passed on to the offspring. When whites and blacks marry, their children's skin color is always somewhere between black and white. William Thomson's student, the Scottish engineer Jean Ken, pointed this out. A superior variant is quickly mixed and diluted by a multitude of inferior variants and is not preserved in the offspring, as natural selection suggests. Although Darwin knew from animal and plant breeding that a good trait could be preserved, he had no reasonable genetic theory to refute Jean Ken. Darwin was forced to make concessions and admit that Lamarckism, the use it or lose it principle, was also valid and could be used to supplement the theory of evolution. One of the key concepts of Darwin's theory of evolution was the idea of variation. Where does variation come from? Mendel's pea hybridization experiment. The origin of species does not answer an important question. How do hereditary characteristics and variations pass from one generation to the next? Darwin searched and still couldn't find an answer. In the end, he had to write about it in On the Origin of Species. To Darwin, modern genetics was a black box. Darwin and his supporters and critics knew that no theory would be complete until that black box was cracked. In 1868, Darwin published his tentative hypothesis, panspermia, which attempted to explain the inner workings of the black box of heredity. Panspermia is the idea that cells in all parts of an organism are constantly releasing small organic particles called microsprouts or pansperms. These can accumulate in the gonads and eventually be passed on to the offspring, allowing them to take on the characteristics of the parent. In fact, 2 years before the emergence of the panspermia hypothesis, Gregor John Mendel published the results of his now famous pea hybridization experiment. But no one was interested at the time, including Darwin. Mendel's pea experiment involved crossing a purple-flowered pea with a white-flowered pea. The first pea produced purple flowers. The second, purple and white. The third time, all white. From the results of the pea hybridization experiment, Mendel later derived the principle of dominant and recessive inheritance. Mendel believed that genetic units, or genes, are very stable. A dominant gene and its opposite, a recessive gene, when together, were stable and did not change their nature. These came to be called Mendel's laws. Overall, Mendel's conclusions were enough to explain the black box of genetics. In 1900, three botanists each re-experimented and verified Mendel's conclusions. Darwin, some say, mastered a complex and vast scientific puzzle. Mendel, on the other hand, was responsible for filling in the missing pieces of the puzzle. But Mendel's influence on the rest of the world went far beyond that. Mendel's influence on genetics. The word gene was introduced after Mendel. In modern genetics, a gene is usually defined as a DNA molecule that codes for RNA. DNA controls protein synthesis. Every biological trait Mendel studied, such as the color of the petals of a pea, was controlled by a single DNA molecule. This simple pattern of inheritance is now known as Mendelian or monogenic inheritance. Polygenic inheritance is the opposite of monogenic inheritance. The expression of traits in an organism is controlled by many genes. Science has now documented more than 6,000 human physical traits and diseases that follow Mendel's laws and are controlled by a single gene, most of which have been identified. However, most traits in biology, including many common human diseases such as diabetes and inflammatory diseases, exhibit more complex polygenic inheritance. Many genes, as well as environmental factors, increase the risk of disease. Genetic research has also revolutionized agricultural breeding. Before the genetic revolution, it was impossible to feed 8 billion people with today's crop varieties and livestock. And in recent years, scientists have used genome-wide research to improve crop yields and optimize livestock breeds. In 2001, the first human genome sequence was published. With rapid advances in technology, the speed of sequencing has increased and the cost has decreased. The field of genomics now has an ambitious goal: to sequence every fish, every vertebrate, even every eukaryote on the planet. In addition, genome sequencing is unlocking the full potential of ancient DNA, making it possible to reconstruct the evolutionary history of ancient and modern humans. With the help of sequencing technology, scientists are also well on their way to studying DNA from 1 million years ago. They've stepped directly from the dimension of time into the vast evolutionary history of living things. Darwin's theory of evolution has been around for more than 170 years. At its inception, it was formulated as a hypothesis. Over the years, scientists have perfected uranium lead dating, fossil sequencing, and genetic evidence. Since then, evolution has faced fewer and fewer scientific challenges. But the philosophical controversy remains unresolved. The evolutionary controversy in philosophy. With the rise of the theory of evolution, naturalistic theism began to take hold in 19th century Europe. In the naturalistic worldview, God creates life, but then remains outside of nature and does not participate in its workings. And the atheistic worldview constructed by the theory of evolution had a far greater impact on philosophy than on science. If nature itself could produce life and evolve human beings, then people wouldn't have to believe in a God. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche went so far as to say, God is dead. Soon after Darwin proposed the theory of evolution, the atheistic worldview constructed by evolution was first accepted by some in philosophy. According to the evolutionary worldview, humans are a species that has survived the competition of the survival of the fittest. Nature uses a ruthless selection mechanism to eliminate some life and preserve others. And this natural selection is still going on. So how can we be the fittest in this evolutionary process? According to this worldview, ensuring that we are not eliminated by ruthless competition has become the primary goal of human existence. The British philosopher Herbert Spencer applied the theory of survival of the fittest to the field of sociology, giving rise to social Darwinism. In the beginning, social Darwinism divided human beings into races. Relationships between races were described as a brutal competition between the living and the dead. In Germany, Ernst Haeckel introduced social Darwinism in 1899 with his book The Mystery of the Universe. Social Darwinism was introduced in Germany and provided the spiritual source for Hitler's Nazism. Hitler's advocacy of the Germanic peoples as the superior race and their expansion throughout the world was also rooted in social Darwinism. Creationism suggests that if mankind strictly adheres to the principle of survival of the fittest, and if there is ruthless competition among humans, then it is only reasonable that man should have the brutal temperament of a wolf. But man's inner morals, such as equality and love, are diametrically opposed to, if not incompatible with, the natural laws of evolution. Creationism holds that, on a moral level, competition between the weak and the strong is contrary to human morality. Human morality demands equality, tolerance, and love. This universal moral consciousness is clearly incompatible with the survival of the fittest selection mechanism. The second philosophical dimension of creationism is the question of randomness. Imagine a pond on ancient Earth with some primordial matter in it. One day, lightning strikes this pond and strikes the primordial matter, creating amino acids. And then the amino acids become the building blocks of proteins. And this would have to happen many, many, many times before there would be enough life on Earth. In terms of mathematical probability, the odds are close to zero. The philosophical thinking that follows from believing that life is a random, low-probability event is even more serious. If human life is the product of a random event in the evolutionary process of nature, then you and I exist by chance. Our lives have no purpose. Then why are we here? What is the purpose of our lives? Creationism asks how an evolutionary worldview can explain the meaning of human existence. When people are confused about the meaning of life, nothingness becomes an internal fear that they must deal with. Creationism criticizes, if human beings are in the process of evolution, then the ultimate goal is to become the strongest in competition. To achieve this goal, people will do anything, even violate morality and ethics. So it's easy for a society that believes in evolution to lose its morality. Pragmatism, the ability to do whatever it takes to get what you want, becomes the dominant philosophy of life. Think about the times and the society we live in. Isn't that the case? The merging of creationism and evolution. Those who still believe in creationism today blend it with evolution to varying degrees. One view is that the Creator, having established the laws of nature, then ceased to intervene in the natural world. The mechanism of natural selection is left to guide the evolution of species. This view is very close to naturalistic theism. Another view is that after the creation of the universe, the Creator continued to intervene in the evolution of species. A mysterious Creator caused genetic mutations to ensure that one organism would evolve into another, and that life forms would evolve from simple to complex. Natural selection is an evolutionary process maintained by a creator. It's often said that there have been two major scientific breakthroughs in the history of mankind. The first was the theory of neoplasia, and the second was the theory of evolution. The theory of evolution is a comprehensive and systematic scientific account of the development of life on Earth and its causes, based on a wealth of scientific facts. This led to a breakthrough in the unsolved problem of biological evolution. But to this day, some people still believe that we were created intentionally. How did life originate? I think the debate between creationism and evolution will continue in the future. Does it really matter where we think we came from? It absolutely does. Throughout history, we've seen how different worldviews have influenced human behavior. We've seen that the inhumane behavior of human beings throughout history has not only been condoned, it's been allowed. So we think it's really important where we come from. Again, we ask the question, are we the product of purposeful, intelligent design, or are we the result of a myriad of random events in the universe? I'm sure everyone has their own answer. Thanks for listening. See you next time.